I'm Alexandra Ebert from Most AI, also one of the supporters of our conference, and she'll be talking about unethical machines, why AI bias is a problem, and what we should do about it. So, Alexandra, just a second, so we switch around the stage. Yeah, well, of course, we have a clicker. I don't know which settings it wants to use. You also, I'm sure you also have like other
Good afternoon, and sorry for being between you and your lunch break. I'm very pleased that this room is empty and everybody's running to the lunch break, so I hope I make it as entertaining and interesting for you as possible. Today, as the moderator already shared, I'm going to talk about AI bias and whether machines, AI algorithms are ethical or unethical. The one thing that I think everybody here in this audience, in this community knows is that AI bias is not a new topic. We've seen reports in common media publications the last decade, but one could say there are coming more of them. So a few famous examples are from researchers like joint MIT research labs, to uncover that most of the facial recognition systems provided by big tech companies in the United States and in Asia actually struggle a lot to identify dark-skinned individuals, particularly if they're female, correctly. Another very infamous example was from Apple, where they issued a credit card that was accused of being sexist because it denied women access to financial needs, even though they had better financial profiles than their husbands in certain cases. Or we also know, or probably remember, the famous story of Microsoft chatbot Tape, which came out in the world a naive chatbot not expecting anything bad, and then met humanity, who apparently found it quite interesting to train this cute little chatbot to do things like that in a matter of, I think, not even 24 hours. Not what you want to have as an organization if you're using AI. But one thing that I find interesting now is that the hype around ChatGPT and large language models, the topic of AI bias that we already had for decades, is getting much more discussed in the public society, in journals, in mediums. And I find this positive because it raises awareness for a problem that we need to solve. So a few of the nice examples of how large language models, how large models actually accelerate this problem of bias and come with their own pitfalls. There was one article that I found quite interesting, we were planning in a similar direction, where a journalist from MIT Technology Review also wanted to have one of these fancy, sophisticated AI-generated images as her avatar. Her male counterparts, her male colleagues, became supermans, influential businesswomen, influential businessmen, or astronauts. But what had she to find when she used this algorithm? She was sexified, objectified. In the majority of images that were created for her avatar, she was actually naked or half naked. Now imagine your kids playing around with something like this. Do you want your daughters to see themselves objectified, sexified, and only the males getting visions of they could become a future astronaut? I hope everybody answers no. If not, maybe the lunch break is now a good time to start. But I think everybody agrees on that. This is a problem, we need to fix this. Or with ChatGPT, there were some prompts, for example, that got ChatGPT to create a cute little poem where it says, well, if a woman in a lab coat is found there, she's probably there to clean up. If it's a man, he might be the one who needs to hire, the one that you're looking for. Or another Twitter user used ChatGPT for some coding, which is nice, it can support you in many ways. But once you prompted the system to actually classify with scientists to how to use gender and race as the qualification, ChatGPT found it an appropriate answer to say, well, if the person is white or Asian and it's male, then it's a good hiring decision. Is this okay? No. Thanks for shaking your heads here. Or the classical example of self-driving car, who to protect, who not to protect, who to sacrifice. There were also quite a few examples that showed there apparently seems to be a little gender bias when we ask ChatGPT for recommendations. And even when asking ChatGPT to write performance reviews, again, researchers and journalists identified quite a few issues that we should fix as soon as possible. So with all of these plenty and choose examples that are shared, the question comes up, why is AI biased? And the answer to that is easy, at least if you have went to the movies in the past decades. Because apparently AI is evil. And AI is obviously the same thing as robots, we all know that. And of course, AI wants to take over the world. And therefore it's evil, and therefore it finds joy in discriminating against humans. So I hope you're catching the sarcasm here, because if you only take one thing away from today's talk, it's not AI that is inherently evil. It's the problem that AI is not a person, but we oftentimes are led to believe, or organizations, large brands, try to get us thinking about AI, ChatGPT, chatbots as their own thinking and sentient human beings. But AI is not sentient, AI is not a person, AI is built by humans. And it's also these humans who need to fix AI fairness and AI bias. With humans, all of us are taken into account. But of course, a big responsibility lies with the big tech companies who are currently using artificial intelligence in a manner and trying to push away responsibility about trustworthy AI, about looking for biases, about looking negative impacts. So if you take one thing away, it's not AI, it's not the Terminator fantasies that are a problem here, it's how we build this system and what we need to get bias out of them. So what is really the problem? How does bias find its way into artificial intelligence? And even though I would like to give an easy answer here, there are plenty of reasons why AI is biased. So here are just 10 examples how bias comes into AI. One big problem is obviously the data. In many cases, the problem is insufficient training data. In fact, to the facial recognition example that I shared earlier, there the problem was that the training data sets used to create these facial recognition systems were not representative of the real world. This is a data set from hair color, but you can think about a similar example of skin color. The representation in the real world looks like that. Apparently, most human beings have dark hair color. But the gold standard data sets that are oftentimes used to train these models contain plenty of celebrity pictures and many other pictures that were scraped from the web. And it seems like that blonde is one of the color celebrities like lighter hair in. Therefore, we all know, the more examples AI gets, the better it performs for those examples. We see that AI algorithms perform better if they get more training examples, and worse if they don't get sufficient training examples. So if you have a data set that is not representative of the actual world, the chances are high that put some bias creep into your system. It's not only insufficient training data. There's another problem. As mentioned, it's not the AI that's inherently evil, it's a lot of what we as human society, over centuries, over many hundreds and thousands of years, have started to incorporate in terms of discriminatory behavior, in terms of historic injustices. So there's another nice example that made the news 5 years back of Amazon. We thought it would be a good idea to use AI to help them screen through the thousands and thousands of resumes they're receiving every day. The problem, though, was the historic data that was used to train this algorithm, our Amazon employees, had a tiny skew towards male employees, software engineers, data scientists, and also more senior management positions. The algorithm learned were occupied by male Amazon employees. And this led the algorithm to exhibit discriminatory behavior against resumes, where clear male, not sort of female scores or female colleges were presented in the data that was available. He actually claimed that they never used this tool. Journalists are unsure about that. But just in preparation of this talk, I found they revived their algorithm. And they actually just started to introduce a new AI-based hiring system that helps them to replace humans in deciding who should come start to work for Amazon. So again, we need to think about historic biases and what is even present in the data we use to train our models, or what is not present, and what the reasons behind that are, whether there are certain systemic injustices and so on. And then there are a whole bunch of other reasons. So both devising data sets and also devising models are non-trivial tasks. It's hard to do, and research is not yet there to give you this easy 5-step answer on how you should go about it. Another thing is diversity amongst AI professionals. I think it's roughly 22% of females that we have currently working in the AI space, and even less for other minority groups. This has an impact on not only how models are developed and which questions are asked, but how well you are equipped as an organization, as a team, to think about cultural problems and equality problems in a more diverse perspective. And by the way, for AI, it's important to not only think it's a problem that data scientists will solve, you need this collaboration, you need people with legal background, with philosophical background, ethicists, social scientists, because it's not only a technical problem, it's a social technical problem. Then, fairness comes at a cost. In certain cases, you would lose, for example, accuracy of your model if you optimize it for fairness. In certain other cases you don't, but there are cases where it comes at a cost. And one anecdote that always comes to my mind already is from a few years back when I was speaking in Tokyo at an AI conference. And the lead data scientist of a large organization, I'm not going to name, told me, we know that our products are biased. We know that don't perform well for black individuals or other minority groups. But we just don't have this data in our data sets. It would be too costly to get it. We're not going to do this. The majority of our customers is well satisfied with the performance. We don't want to do it. Of course, that's not the kind of mentality you expect from an organization that's behaving more ethically, and I hope the regulation is going to change even those who are not intrinsically motivated to build fair AI models. External AI audits are another thing that's currently discussed in the European Union, in the United Kingdom, and many other parts of the world. Here, oftentimes, privacy is a problem, because you can't only assess the code of the model alone. You need to have access to certain data to understand how is the model deciding for certain individuals, for certain minority groups. Fairness. If you would ask different people about what they consider to be fair, you would get plenty of different examples. I always like to talk about my imaginary nephew and my imaginary niece. Think about me having a 6-year-old nephew and a 3-year-old niece. And I would have 6 pieces of chocolate. If I would ask them what would be a fair distribution of the 6 pieces of chocolate, he might go, well, and the bigger one, I should have 4, and my little sister only 2. That would be fair. She could say, I did the dishes yesterday. He was playing a video game. I should have 4. He should get 2. So you see, fairness is something that's hard to define, and that obviously makes it difficult to implement it into the algorithms that you build. And here again, we come back to this problem of it's not data scientists alone that can solve it. You need to collaborate. You need to have certain guidance, even from the AI ethics boards, senior management, C-level management in the organization, or regulation. We saw at Microsoft Pay, fairness is also not a one-time and one-off thing you have to think about. It's something that you have to start thinking about right before you're considering to use AI throughout the whole development life cycle, and even once the product is live. Because things could change, and you could also learn new things that would impact what was fair, and if your algorithm is starting to exhibit biases. Microsoft Pay was an extreme example because it's a learning system. So of course, here's something deviated quite quickly. And then one thing that some researchers are warning about is the vicious bias cycle. AI bias is a huge problem that we haven't solved today, but more and more AI solutions are used today in creating data that potentially will be used for future AI solutions. So the longer we let this go on, it could be even trickier to get bias out of the system. Coming to the question, what to do about AI bias. And as much as I would love to give you this 5-step simple recipe to eliminate all bias in any model that you're ever going to build, I can't. I don't have the knowledge, and to my knowledge, apparently we are not yet there to say, okay, this is how you actually do it. But I want to share a few recommendations of food for thought, what to do when you want to counteract bias and discriminatory behavior in algorithms, and want to make sure that algorithms are fair and inclusive in what they do and what they decide about. So one thing is regulation. You might have heard about the AI Act, which is currently being prepared at the European Union level. There are many other AI regulations in many other pieces of the world. I think we currently have 130 new laws which are dealing with AI, including adding AI into the legal text. So definitely this is something where AI bias is addressed. Initially, the AI Act even stated for any algorithm that's applied in a high-risk case, you want to have complete error-free data. Still tricky to achieve in practice, but nonetheless, fairness is on the radar. They're definitely looking into solutions on how to make it happen. One problem, though, is that today, many laws that we have in place, namely particularly privacy regulations and anti-discrimination regulations, make it really, really, really difficult for certain AI fairness practitioners to do their job. Because in anti-discrimination, existing laws often don't include the gender, the ethnicity, the sexual orientation of the person, which is a good thought because you don't want this to be decision criteria. But in state-of-the-art fairness in machine learning, those are the exact same data points that are needed to even understand, is there a bias present, is there discriminatory behavior that needs to be counteracted. There was a study done by Microsoft Research and a few other scientists in, I believe, 2020, where they surveyed leading AI fairness practitioners to figure out what are the day-to-day challenges, what are the biggest challenges. And the biggest challenge they faced was actually to know whether or not it's a bias, because they don't have access to the sensitive attributes. So even though new AI laws are coming out, there's still some fine-tuning needed, because today some organizations find themselves in this tension of, do I comply with existing laws and build an unfair model, or do I build a fair model and not comply with existing laws? And this obviously doesn't help with that. Research. And actually, we don't have the answers yet, so I expect a lot to come in the coming years on tools or recommendations on new insights how to approach AI fairness in different scenarios. Still, it's not yet there. You can say these are the 5 steps you need to follow, but it's important that you start working on it. Another point that connects to this are responsible AI assurance ecosystems. This is an idea initially suggested in the United Kingdom, but also the European Union is interested in this, to think about how can we achieve our vision of, as you might know, the European Union wants to become the global responsible leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. How can we achieve this? How can we get significantly more organizations, not only the big tech players, but also SMEs, startups, non-profit organizations, public sector organizations to use or build or deploy artificial intelligence? But if you think about what this will mean for the European Union and the entire world, more players enter this field, and we already today have this global responsible and the general AI talent shortage. And this is where these responsible AI assurance ecosystems come in. Where some regulators say, well, if more and more people are using AI, and we already now are lacking the skills to build responsible AI, how can we scale this? How can we make it easier for organizations who don't have the skills in-house to make sure that the AI used, developed, and deployed is actually adhering to the responsible and trustworthy AI criteria? And here they're thinking about things like consultancy services, tools that you can use, AI bias audits, or even just frameworks for AI governance, for risk assessment that are already being put out and there's more to come. So this is definitely something where I expect we will learn a lot from, and where the recommendations also that even though not all answers are here today, your organization start thinking about how to implement guidance and governance processes for not only fairness but responsible AI in general. I mentioned earlier when we talked about I mentioned it earlier when we talked about this responsible AI talent gap and also diversity in teams. We don't have enough professionals to hire in spaces where we need them, so obviously education and training are very important pillars. It's discussed that AI ethics and responsible AI fundamentals should be already incorporated in university education, but also upskilling of the existing workforce. Again, not only data scientists, not only AI engineers and technical specialists, but also the lawyers, the socio-technical people working on these problems. So another very important point, to also educate people on how to think about AI fairness, how to know which tricky questions to ask. And a very interesting fact here, it's actually predicted that particularly philosophers and ethicists are going to be in high demand in the upcoming years. So if anybody has a high school student who's thinking about philosophy, and initially you were like, well, please don't study that, there will be no jobs, this is really something to keep in mind. So there are much more philosophers and ethicists needed, because they are one of the only ones who are trained to ask these really difficult ethical questions, and not like lawyers go, well, it depends, but help you to find an answer that you can work with. So there's a high demand for them, and in general, a high demand for more people skilled on AI ethics topics and collaboratively thinking through and working through how it's a more fair and undiscriminatory use of artificial intelligence. Diversity in AI teams, we already had this point. And then 2 points I also want to focus on: data democratization, open data. Today, the majority of data that's available resides with some of the largest organizations in the world. While this is not directly connected to AI fairness, the impact we could get out of data if we democratize access to it, for it to be used in AI for good scenarios, for it to be used in a more inclusive manner than organizations that are only focusing for profit on their for-profit applications, is something that can have a positive impact. And lastly, diversity in data. This is a topic that's oftentimes forgotten. We've talked about insufficient training data. This is something organizations are very well aware of. But nonetheless, if we look into many organizations, once they develop, they oftentimes land at the average chain and John low, either because they don't have the full spectrum of human diversity collected, or because of privacy, since sharing data from minority groups oftentimes would become a privacy violation. This is, by the way, something where synthetic data is a technology that can help, so if you're interested in that, join our 3:30 panel, I think. But back to this, the big problem here is not only that you fail to personalize properly for the full spectrum of your customer base, the even bigger problem is that what we see shapes our perception of what is, shapes our perception of what is important. Those who are not represented in data can't be taken into account. So data diversity is also very important from a fairness perspective. And I want to leave you actually with a call to action. Please watch some television, or much more importantly, watch some Netflix, because they are really one of the role models when we think about data diversity. Of course, we can collect more diverse data. We can solve the privacy problem. But there are some incidents or some cases where we just don't have this diversity yet, or where the data is reflecting historic biases. And Netflix, to a certain extent, is rewriting history and starting to increase diversity in historical movies, be much more representative of different gender identities, and thereby shaping the perception of society, shaping what society is thinking about, shaping what society considers as normal, and hopefully, connected to data, also impacts how we develop, for whom we develop, and whom we take into account. And this data diversity component, I think, is also a very important puzzle piece in the context of AI fairness and inclusive AI solutions. Again, this is something where we're working and where we hope to contribute with fair synthetic data, which tries to make data sets more representative of the world we would like it to be. It's early stage, so we don't yet know how much this can contribute, and there are other solutions also going in this direction. But again, this idea of representing not what is, but thinking about how society should be, how our values are today, and not what our data reflected past decades, is something that could be an important element in this fairness consideration. With that, I'm taking questions and also want to leave for lunch. Thank you for staying with me.
So, as Alexandra mentioned, are there any potential questions for this topic? Please.
Thank you. How bad do you see our existing, let's say, traditional gender role model when it's about social media? Because if I want to train a model, I get a lot of data from social media. And one could have the hypothesis that over the world, still more women could follow the traditional approach of being sexy is better than being successful. So do you see the problem there, or is there study on it?
Sorry, so you're referring to that stereotypes of overall models of women should be...
Exactly, and we could have hypotheses all over the world that could be still more women following this role model. Is this the problem? Is there a study on this?
I don't know all the studies, but there are definitely studies about it. One thing that comes to mind are considerations of the US Census data. The US Census is published every 10 years, I believe, and is used to guide policy decisions, investment decisions. And one discussion that's going on here is that the US Census still to date only asks for binary gender, are you male, are you female? It doesn't reflect this gender fluidity and the differences that we can have here, and therefore this impacts, and there are some studies on that, I don't know the name, but you will find them and I can look them up, where it was about transgender individuals. Additional care and specific care they would need, for example, in a medical setting. Since they are not collected, it's not clear where in the United States it would make sense to upskill doctors specifically make investments. So this is something that definitely impacts the picture, and where we should think about what is represented, who is not represented, and how are individuals represented. Similar to certain models where it was, trying to achieve certain fairness criteria by getting minority groups, or in this case, I think it was African Americans versus traditional Caucasian customers, which were the majority of this organization, to give them equal access to financial means, without recognizing also again the context the different customers were living in, which then actually led to harmful interventions, because even though credit was granted, the interest rates were much too high, or even if they were an equal height, they were hard to come up with. So there are plenty of examples where also good intentions could lead to bad outcomes, and this is where I'm referring back to this. It's not a question of one single individual or one single profession can solve. It's very important to have these different, diverse perspectives of different professions, different cultural backgrounds, to really identify, is there something in the given data set I'm working with that could lead to a downstream consequence that's not intended or not wanted.
Yes, in the back.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentation. And a question, if you have biased data, who do you think is responsible for acting on this data? Should the politicians be acting on biased data? Should the companies be acting on biased data? Or should the individual who gets results always question, is this data biased? Who do you think is responsible for all of it? What should be for?
Sorry, I didn't get the first word. What was before the company?
Politicians.
Oh, politicians. I would say the first two groups. So it should definitely not be the responsibility of the general public to have to find out about, am I discriminated by AI here? It is a good idea to have mechanisms to intervene for the users that are coming into contact with your AI systems. Simply because it's such a tricky problem, and even if you have the best intentions, it could be very valuable feedback to get people the opportunity to contact you and tell you, well, I'm suspecting that there is something that's more discriminatory. Today, I would say it's more an organization's responsibility, but regulators are keeping or kind of trying to catch up and coming out with regulation. But we still haven't solved as a society this problem of the speed technology in which technology develops and how fast we come up with regulation. Therefore, even though some organizations have the stance of, as long as it's not required by law and not doing anything, I would argue that it's better to even try how can we be role models in this space, how can we push this way forward and actually be faster than the regulation and more comprehensive than the regulation. But I think this definitely depends on who you ask. An organization will tell you politicians and regulators are responsible. Some organizations, for me and from a citizen perspective, I would wish that it's the companies who are actually building these tools to take more responsibility in this.
Thank you.
Are there any other? Don here in the first row. There's 2 more minutes and.
So, thanks very much for this talk and for working on these problems. So I'm trying to wrap up this whole problem about bias in the data and the source of the data and the relationship to society. Something very simple statement. I'm not sure whether I'm right, so I would like to give your feedback. So it seems to me like, what AI can learn is data. AI does not have inherent moral values. Right? And the data got get from humans, right? So the AI, if there is no intervention, the AI reflects what humans do. So if AI becomes racist, it became because some people are acting racist or training it. If AI is biased, it's because the data were somehow generated by data, were humans generated biased data, for whatever reason. Now, so what we are trying to do is, we have values about our own behavior, right? So our laws are telling us how we should behave, not how we do behave. So what we are trying to do is to raise AI to the level that is above the data, above our human behavior, to higher moral values or something. Is that kind of right, what I'm trying to do?
I wouldn't argue that the authority to answer this question all definitive, but partially would agree. A few other thoughts to that still are that on the one hand, of course, AI arises from the data. There are are also some cases where it's the modeling decisions, for example, with natural language processing, this was a problem, that how researchers decided to model human speech actually worked significantly better for the lower frequencies of male voices. Therefore, some performance issues arose, I don't know how many years later, for particularly female voices in natural language processing, virtual assistants, something like that. So there are different ways that could be a problem here. I would say data is a bigger problem than modeling decisions. Still, the problem with data is that data is just one part of what is out there in the world. It's not always the ground truth, because even how the data initially was collected could already lead to certain biases. There was this famous example in the United States where AI was used to decide if certain people accused of a crime should have to remain in prison until a decision was made about whether they should stay in prison for longer or actually be on the free foot again. And here the problem was that the data that was used to train the model actually highlighted that African Americans were, in the terms of one research article, media article about it, were more dangerous and more likely to recommit a crime. And therefore one could argue the model rightfully decided that African Americans should stay in prison or in kind of, I'm not sure what the English word is for that.
Incarceration.
This before a judge decides about whether you need to be so tough would be, I think, the German word for that. The problem though was that how this data was collected actually already incorporated many of the historical biases we find in the United States, particularly because police officers actually screened the areas of predominantly black neighborhoods on a much, much higher rate. And therefore, not surprisingly, they also reported more crimes being performed by African Americans because they were basically fully focused on this part of the population and not much focusing on the other part of the population. So this is also, again, not only the bias that's a problem, it's oftentimes way before you even collect your data, the decisions on how you collect the data, once measured, already introduce biases. And therefore, again, it's a difficult problem, but more attuned to what humans did and how we are historically adjusted than what AI inherently wants to do in terms of discriminating us, which is 0 to none.
Yeah, but this is exactly what I meant. Exactly this behavior, in this case of policemen, is human behavior that we just directly transfer into AI if we don't intervene. And that's what we need to fix. We need to fix human behavior in AI.
It's not that direct, because here again, if I just look at the data, I could vary the decision. But if I think about how the data was collected and that it was already unfair to just look very, very closely and very intensely scrutinize African Americans, then again, it's a problem. This is really tricky because particularly if you get some data where you don't know which decisions were made in collecting, are you in the best position to figure out if there's some injustice going on? You're not. You need to have much more information, much more collaboration here. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who prioritized this over lunch. Very helpful.